Hey guys, just bear with me for a second. We're about to start. We'll start and let a few more people join us before we properly begin. Morning, Kok Lian. Hope you guys had a good meditation session with JP this morning. How's everyone? Hi, Pastor Shin. Nice to see that you're up so early. You had a really late night last night. For those of you who don't know, I was actually talking to her at like 1:30 a.m. or something like that. We were reminiscing about our time in Kathmandu in Nepal when we were with Rinpoche and when we were in Semladrang. And the time I had to stay behind to do an inventory of all the spoons and forks in the Ladrang for Bengkui. So that was a lot of fun. It would be nice to go back to Nepal once the whole COVID-19 situation has calmed down a little more. Good morning, Iman. How's everyone doing? How was your mindful morning meditation session with JP today? I hope you guys had a good time, as usual, and had a good discussion. Morning, Bradley. Oh, should I say good evening? It's 7 p.m. in BC, right? Okay, we'll wait for a couple more seconds before we properly start. I'm going to be talking about something that a lot of, you guys hear all the time, right, as part of our practice. And I'm going to go through some, I guess, very prosaic ways of applying it into our daily lives. Because people quite often talk about how they can go about practicing or cultivating humility in their lives, in a very practical manner. So I'm going to go into that and talk about that. Namaste, Purna. Kastocha? Purna, no, we don't have a center in Lumbini, but there is a center there, which is not ours, but it was established by Venerable Gonsang Rinpoche, and that center is in Lumbini. So if you would like to check out something that belongs to our lineage, you are very welcome to go and visit Venerable Gonsang Rinpoche's center, which is in Lumbini in Nepal. Good morning, Pastor Hani. Hope everything's okay in KL. Okay, wait, just let me get comfortable. All right, so if you guys are tuning in from wherever you are, and obviously everyone who's saying hi to me on the feed, you will know that my name is Pastor Jinai, and I am a pastor based here in Malaysia as part of the Kechara organization. So today I'm going to be talking about the topic of humility. And before we start every Dharma talk, we set a motivation and also talk about the source of our teachings, because we never give teachings without citing the source, because it has to have a lineage, right? So before we begin, do a quick prayer. I go for refuge in my Lama from whom I've received these teachings. I go for refuge in the lineage Lamas from whom my Lama has received these teachings. All right. So, humility. Buddhists talk about it. Buddha talked about it. Good morning, Yo Miao Ki. Sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly. Humility. Buddhists talk about it. Lama Tsongkhapa talked about it. All of our practices, emphasize humility, and even, Zambala's countenance, part of why he appears so in that manner with that expression is to remind us of the importance of humility and to remind us of the importance of removing arrogance from our behavior and from our mind stream. So what is humility? When I was going through the definition of humility in preparation for this talk, of course, the first place I went to was actually the dictionary, right? to get definition. And what the dictionary actually defines humility as is it associates the practice of humility or the act of humility with having low self-esteem and low self-worth. And that is not entirely accurate. Humility can be better defined as the absence of pride or the absence of arrogance. So the opposite of humility is actually arrogance. Now, good morning, David. Thank you for joining us here today. So, by the way, just to let you guys know, I will be answering questions. If you can keep them to the end of the session, you feel free to post them on the thread along the way if you want, but there is a chance I might miss it, all right? So better to save it to the end of the session. So the importance of humility and what is the opposite of humility. So the opposite of humility is actually arrogance. And before we go into talking about humility, let's talk about the consequences of arrogance instead. So what happens when you are arrogant? When you are arrogant, you become someone who actually ends up rejecting knowledge. You end up rejecting information, and as a result, you actually end up rejecting advancement and improvement. A person who's arrogant thinks that they know everything, or they put on the front, they put on the mask that they know everything. And so as a result of that, as a result of rejecting knowledge, as a result of rejecting information, and as a result of rejecting help, what happens is then you end up not learning, and you end up stagnating. Now, I'm going to talk in very general terms. Of course, with everyone, with every individual, it will differ. But in general, you might say that arrogance arises as a result of trying to hide something. So, good morning, Sukfan. It looks like the Mindful Morning Meditation group is joining. So, okay, arrogance. It comes from wanting to hide something, right? In general, so it's designed to keep people away. So, for example, if you are arrogant, perhaps you are being arrogant because you're trying to protect yourself because of something that you experienced previously, because of a previous trauma that you've experienced. So you're arrogant because you don't want people to get too close to you, because you don't want to go through that experience or risk going through that experience again. Another way how arrogance might manifest as a result of wanting to protect yourself is that you lack an ability to do something, and so you're trying to hide that ability or your lack of ability to do something. So you might be arrogant because you're trying to say to people, don't get too close to me because I don't want you to actually find out what it is that I know and what it is that I don't know. What happens as a result of this? Yes, I completely agree, Kok Lian. It is also the expression of fear within a person. So the fear of being found out, the fear of being hurt, the fear of things changing and not being able to deal with it. There's a lot of fear that is the basis of arrogance. And what you find is that people who are not fearful, people who are very welcoming, people who are very open, and people who are very relaxed are people who are not arrogant. So what happens as a result of being arrogant and wanting to keep people away so that you don't show, or you're trying to hide your lack of ability to do something, or your lack of knowledge in something, is that it kind of perpetuates a vicious cycle. Because as a result of keeping people away, you end up also keeping people away from you who might be able to teach you something to actually remove, or to actually change your lack of ability into, your ability to do something. So because you're arrogant, then you also keep away people who don't help you to improve emotionally, right? And you keep away people who don't help you to improve technically, skills-wise, or knowledge-wise. And so, as a result of that, because you end up keeping people away who might be able to help you, then you end up becoming more arrogant because you have to do something even more to push away people even more, to hide that insecurity, to hide that fear, to hide the lack of ability. All right, so arrogance reinforces and it adds to our insecurities, and all of it arises from fear, as Kok Lian has shared. It arises from insecurity, it arises from us being defensive and having things to hide. So now that I've talked about arrogance, now I'm going to talk about why humility is so important. And if arrogance leads to this result, then humility as the antidote will lead to the opposite result. And so practicing humility, I'm not going to lie, it is uncomfortable, right? For most of us, it's uncomfortable. Why? Because we are trained by everything around us to be arrogant. We're trained by everything around us to have pride in what you do, right? We're trained by society, we're trained by everything around us to be self-aggrandizing, to talk about our accomplishments, to talk about ourselves. And so when someone tells us, oh, you should practice humility, you should be more humble, it goes against everything that we've learned, it goes against everything that we've been told we should do. And so practicing humility is uncomfortable because our comfort zone, what we are used to, is being arrogant. And so practicing humility is basically coming and applying emergency brake to the type of people that we are, and throwing ourselves into reverse gear and being the complete opposite. It is uncomfortable. And the thing is, as long as we focus on how uncomfortable it is, we will never make a change. So that's what I'm actually going to talk about today, which is practical steps that we can practice to try and cultivate more humility in our lives. Now, why is humility important? Like I mentioned before, people who are humble, people who are not arrogant, are very open, are very warm, are very welcoming, are very nice to be around. In the same way that, when we see someone who's arrogant, we're like, ugh, I don't want to get close to this person because this person is so arrogant. If you think about the opposite, someone who's humble is someone that you do want to be around because they are nice people, they are open, they are encouraging, they are non-judgmental. So humility is actually very liberating because humility brings us closer to other people. And humility opens us up to new experiences, it opens us up to new knowledge, it opens us up to new skills, new understanding, new abilities. And humility helps us to relax. Why? Because you're not governed by the fear that if you're wrong or someone happens to expose the fact that you don't know something, you're not governed by the fear that you're going to be exposed. You get to relax, you get to be relaxed. You get to be in control of yourself. Humility helps us to improve, it helps us to mature emotionally. If you notice, some people, when they're arrogant, think about the people who are close to you and the people who manifest their arrogance very, very obviously. Think about those people and think about how they react when there's anything that might expose them, or when there's anything that might shake their worldview or something, or put them at risk of being found out, or put themselves at risk of being in an experience that might traumatize them even further. Think about those people and think about how they react when things go wrong for them. How do they react? When you see them, they tend to get very caught up over certain things, right? They tend to replay and rehash the same result and the same outcome over and over again. They tend to mull over things and they tend to dwell over things. They tend to engage in a lot of self-blame, or they tend to blame other people, which is what I talked about in last week's talk, in week 1 of this series. So when you are humble, you are being the direct opposite of being arrogant, and hence when you are humble, you learn how to mature emotionally because you learn how to let things go. You learn how to not dwell on things. You learn how to not mull over things, and you learn that when things go wrong, you don't have to get caught up in it. So humility actually helps us to learn from our mistakes, and it helps us to improve. And I wrote down in my notes over here, I always have notes when I talk to you guys because I have a tendency to go way off topic. So having notes helps me to stay on course and helps me to cover all the points I want to cover. So I wrote down all the different spheres in our life where how being humble helps us to improve. So I was reading an article a little while ago about the importance of intellectual humility. And in academia, intellectual humility is very important because intellectual humility helps us to, it leads to more research. Intellectual humility and being open to being wrong and being open to being proven wrong helps us to make scientific advancements. It helps us to make technological advancements because you're okay with someone else reviewing your research and reviewing your research methods and reviewing the way how you do things and how you came about to a certain conclusion, and being open to the possibility of that improving. And so being humble in that situation actually helps us to make technological advancements, helps us to advance our knowledge about the world and about the world around us and how we can improve things. Humility in our personal lives helps us to have less conflict in our lives. It helps us to be able to say, honey, I'm so sorry, I was wrong. Honey, I'm so sorry that I fought you on this, you were right. Right? Humility helps us to have more pleasant, more harmonious interpersonal relationships. Humility in a work environment helps us to have a more pleasant work environment. I'm so sorry, I don't know how to do this, can you please show me? It helps us to be more open with our peers. It helps us to be more open with our subordinates or the people that we're managing and supervising. And it helps us to be more open to feedback from our supervisors. And humility, most importantly for us in a spiritual environment, is that humility helps us to become better students to our teachers. And it helps us to become better Dharma brothers and sisters with the people who are practicing with us. It helps us to become more engaged and more harmonious members of our spiritual community. And it helps us to improve our practice, because when we're arrogant with our practice, we assume that we are already at the end. We assume that we are already we've already accomplished all the results we want to accomplish. And humility helps us to improve our practice, because we're always thinking, no, I haven't gotten to the end yet. I haven't achieved the results I want to accomplish. I do need to practice more. I do need to practice harder. I do need to be more committed to my practice. And so when you are humble, you end up seeing a lot more advancements in your spiritual practice and more results, because you always think that there's always something that you can improve on. There's always something else more that you can do. All right, so on Wesak Day, I did talk about humility as well. And one of the questions that I was asked is, how do you balance humility and self-confidence? And I also know that a lot of people think that when you practice humility, you end up becoming a doormat. So how do you be humble? How do you cultivate humility without being a doormat? As a result of people fearing that practicing humility will turn them to a doormat and put them up at risk of being abused or at risk of being exploited, when people think that way, yes, they're going to reject the practice of humility. And that's because they have this misconception that being humble means allowing people to walk all over you. Now, if you think to the example of our Lama, if you think to an example of His Eminence Kapji Sen Tuku Rinpoche, our Guru, Rinpoche was extremely humble, but did Rinpoche let people walk all over him? No. I mean, if you look at the Doji Shukden controversy in the Doji Shukden ban, Rinpoche did not let people walk all over him. Yet, in spite of standing up for himself, Rinpoche was also still extremely humble. Right? So humility does not necessarily mean that you are going to become a doormat. Now, so how do you practice humility without sacrificing self-confidence? You can practice humility without sacrificing self-confidence because self-confidence is actually being so secure in your knowledge of yourself, what you know and what you don't know, that you become open to knowledge and information and things and feedback, things that people can share with you. So self-confidence is being secure in your self-worth as much as the self exists. That you won't be shaken or you won't be broken or you won't have your sense of security being destroyed when you're proven wrong or when you are proven that you don't know something. So Purna just asked, do we have any centers in the USA? We have a San Rinpoche Foundation that was based in California. We were there for about a year before activities in Malaysia pulled us back here. So at the moment, no, we don't have a place in the USA, but there are many centers, Dharma centers of our lineage in the USA, which I will talk about after this live stream. All right. So now that I've talked about, the consequences of being arrogant and the importance of practicing humility, what you guys all want to know is basically how can you practice humility in daily life. Now, I know when we're talking about humility, especially in our center, especially in Kechara, the first thing everyone's minds is going to turn to is Rinpoche's favorite prayer, one of Rinpoche's favorite prayers, which is the 8 verses of thought transformation, which is back there on the wall behind me, that yellow framed card. Interesting fact, that prayer actually used to be at the entrance of the very, very first Kechara House 1 KH1. It was painted on a very large canvas and put up at the front of, at the entrance of our Gompa back then, because Rinpoche felt that it was so important for us to practice in everyday life. So, I'm not going to go too much into the 8 verses of thought transformation, in spite of how critical it is to spiritual practice, because Rinpoche has actually given a very incredible and very extensive teaching on the 8 verses of thought transformation, which I'll put a link to after this live stream. I encourage all of you to go and watch it. What I will talk about is more practical, everyday terms, how to cultivate humility. And what I want everyone to understand is the fact that if you set aside the fact that the 8 verses is has very religious terms, like it's composed in a very religious way, it is still actually extremely beneficial if we apply it to ourselves in everyday life. So the first thing I want to share with you guys about how we can practice and humility or cultivate more humility in our everyday lives is to spend more time listening to other people. All right? So most of us are encouraged to try and get the first word into a conversation and to get the last word in. We want to make sure that we are heard, and that is what society trains us and drills us into doing. Make sure that your opinion is heard, make sure that your opinion is counted for. And as a result of that, we are very pushy when it comes to conversations. So what I want you guys to try and practice in the week ahead is to learn to value others, to make a more conscious effort to value others and to allow others to be heard. To spend time listening to other people, and to, in a conversation, ask more questions than offer opinions. Remember last week we talked about how great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people, right? So try to put that into practice this week. Try to be more conscious of the fact that when you're in a conversation with someone else, try to ask more questions to learn about what other people think and to learn their opinions than to offer your own. And especially when people are in trouble, especially when people need help, try to remember that in a conversation, to help someone else, it's not always necessary to offer your opinion. Oftentimes, what people want more than anything is to be listened to and to be acknowledged and to have someone else recognize that their suffering is valid to them. All right, so how does that link to the 8 verses of thought transformation? When you're with others, practice seeing yourself as the lowest of all. And from the very depths of your heart, hold others as supreme. From the very depths of your heart, practice seeing yourself as lowest of all, listening to others, listening to what it is that they have to say. Purna, you just wrote here, tell Rinpoche to eat only boiled vegetables and fruits. He has a heavy body. Rinpoche actually entered Parinirvana. In case you didn't know, Rinpoche actually entered Parinirvana on September 4th, 2019. Rinpoche's earthly body is no longer with us, and we are currently waiting for Rinpoche's reincarnation. All right, so the first point about practicing humility, or to try to cultivate more humility in our everyday lives, is to try and spend more time listening to others and to value others' thoughts and what they have to say, value other people's opinions. And in daily conversation, try and make a conscious effort to ask more questions than to offer opinions. The second, and in order to do that, we go into the second point. In order to do that, what you actually need to do is you actually need to practice mindfulness, because you actually need to be present and engaged in that interaction and in that conversation in order to be mindful of the fact that you're offering more opinions than asking questions. So practice mindfulness and Focus on the present, which should be easier for those of you who joined JP's Mindful Morning Meditation sessions for the last 44 days, all right? So a key part of practicing mindfulness is actually accepting things for what they are and what is in front of you without judging and without commenting on it. And part of that, not judging and not commenting, is also accepting yourself. It's not also about accepting other people, but it's also about accepting yourself and accepting yourself the way you are, right? So it doesn't mean that when you accept yourself, that you should stop trying to improve. It doesn't mean that you stop striving to improve. But accepting yourself is analyzing yourself, understanding yourself for who you are without judgment and without comment, but in a more positive manner, and then seeing what areas you have about yourself that you wish to improve, that you wish to make progress on. And that means not beating yourself up. It means not berating yourself for what you don't know. Okay? In that instance, when you don't berate yourself for what you don't know, and when you don't beat yourself up for what you don't know, you should also extend that attitude to other people. So practice mindfulness, focus on the present, be fully engaged in the interaction, be fully with other people, and be fully engaged with yourself as well. And analyze yourself, what you know and what you don't know, without judgment, without comment, and then strive to improve from there in a positive manner. What is it about myself that I can make better, and how can I take positive, constructive steps towards improving the situation? So that also means that we should review ourselves against the language of pride. Now, what do I mean by reviewing yourself against the language of pride? So as I mentioned earlier, everything in society around us trains us to be arrogant. It trains us to be prideful in ourselves. And so what happens is that when we review ourselves against the language of pride, subconsciously we've been trained to think that there is nothing wrong with the way we are. There's nothing wrong with the way we think. And hence, when we review ourselves against the language of pride, what happens is we become very uncomfortable. People don't like to think that they're arrogant, because the word arrogant, the word pride, the word smugness, all these words have very negative connotation to them. And so when we review ourselves against that, we don't like it, because we like to think that, we're not that way, right? And so the verse of the 8 verses that I want you guys to think about is, in this case, is that in all actions, examine your mind, and as soon as a disturbing emotion arises, firmly confront and avert it, right? So how do you apply that in a very practical, prosaic manner in your everyday life, in your daily life? By reviewing yourself against the language of pride. Ask yourself the hard questions. When I did that, was I being vain? When I did that, was I being prideful? When I did that, was I being arrogant? Ask yourself the hard questions. Don't be afraid to be honest with yourself. Why are we afraid of being honest with ourselves and the way that we are? Why is it we are so uncomfortable with asking ourselves these hard questions? It's because we like to feel a little pride in what we do, because we've been trained to feel pride in what we do. We've been trained to enjoy praise. We've been trained to enjoy people telling us, oh, you did such a good job in that. Oh, you look so good in that picture. Oh, what a nice family photo of yourself. Oh, you did so well to get that promotion. We like people praising us. We don't like people telling us that we are arrogant, that we are vain, that we're prideful. So how can you try to practice cultivate humility in your everyday life? Is to review before other people do it to yourself. Meditate on yourself and ask yourself the hard questions. Was I being vain when I was doing that? Was I being snobbish? Was I being arrogant? Was I being prideful? Ask yourself the hard questions. When you feel that surge of emotion in yourself, saying, I really don't like this, I'm really uncomfortable, fight it. Firmly confront that disturbing emotion, firmly confront it and avert it. Stamp down that discomfort, and think, when I review myself against this language of right, when I ask myself these hard questions, when I'm being honest with myself, focus on the benefits that arise from the fact that you are asking yourself these difficult questions. And when you recognize these traits in someone else, when you see that someone else is being prideful, when you see someone else is being arrogant, when you see someone else is being vain, recognize that you too are also like that. You may not be conscious of, oh, you know what? There's something that Rinchi told us many, many years ago, which is that the things that you see in other people are exactly the same traits that you should recognize in yourself, because you can't recognize in someone else something that you don't have. Okay, so when you see those traits in somebody else, don't hold them to it, because that's not who they are. Recognize instead that the same traits that they have, you have as well. All right, and be nice to them. Cut them some slack, because just as you wish somebody would cut you some slack, cut them some slack as well. All right, so whenever you meet a person of bad nature, someone who is overwhelmed by negative energy and intense suffering, hold such a rare one dear as if you have found a precious treasure that's very difficult to find. If you see someone else who is being prideful, realize that you yourself are prideful as well. You just may not be conscious of it. So remember what it is that Rinpoche has always said: you can't recognize in somebody else what you do not have yourself. If you see someone else being arrogant, you're arrogant too. All right, so work on your arrogance before you comment on somebody else's. Now, there's something that JP has been emphasizing to you guys who do the mindful morning meditation sessions, which is gratitude. And so every day JP talks about the importance of having a gratitude journal, right? So that is something that you can also do on an everyday in your everyday routine, which is to be grateful for what you have. In other words, take the time to count your blessings. Take the time to be thankful for what you have, and take the time to stop yourself being sucked into this negative spiral of haves and haves not, of wanting more, whether it's for yourself or whether it's for someone else, whether it's internally or whether it's externally. Kok Lian, I've seen your question. What are some effective Dharma methods we can use to deal with people who are arrogant, especially if these people are our bosses and directors? I will address that later, all right? Actually, it's coming up shortly. So, taking the time to be grateful and to count your blessings is a very good and effective way of cultivating a more humble and more positive frame of mind. Another way that you can cultivate humility on a very practical level every single day is to ask for help when you need it. And I know a lot of people don't like that, because a lot of people don't like admitting that they need help, and a lot of people don't like admitting what it is that they don't know. I know that I don't like admitting what I don't know. All right? I like to pretend or give off the impression that I know everything, when it's actually, the fact is, it's impossible for me to know everything. All right, it's impossible for me to know everything. I'm not Buddha. So a good way for me to practice and to cultivate humility every single day is to ask for help when I need it. And that's a very, very good way of cultivating humility, and also is a direct direct path to improving yourself and into improving your knowledge and to improving what it is that you know, right? So recognizing that sometimes we're not able to solve all of our problems, and sometimes we don't know everything to solve all of our problems. It's a very good way of cultivating humility, and a very good way of opening yourself up to knowledge and to improvement. So, accept the defeat that you don't know enough, and let somebody else win, and let somebody else share with you what it is that they do know. How can you go about doing that? How can I go about doing that, right? Because I have so many problems with asking for help when I need it. Think about all the times that you were humbled without realizing it. Think about all the times when you were in a very good mood, and because you were in a good mood, you opened yourself up to asking for help from other people. And then think about how you felt after you acquired that new knowledge. Okay, so think about how liberated and how happy and how at ease and calm you were when you were in that good mood and you opened yourself up to asking other people and letting other people know that you need help. Focus on that. Don't focus on the fact that you feel really uncomfortable now asking for help. Focus on the times when you were in a good mood and you were open to asking for help and how you felt after that. Focus on that instead. And every time you come up to a problem, make a conscious effort. Think, I will set aside this feeling of discomfort that I have right now about revealing the fact that I don't know enough. I will set aside that feeling of discomfort and I will focus instead on how I will feel after I've acquired this new knowledge. Focus on that sense of calm and sense of being settled and being secure. Focus on that instead. And then from there, make your move. Open your mouth and ask for help when you need it. All right. So that's something that, I personally can practice every day as well. Now, related to that is seeking feedback from others on a regular basis, which again is a problem that many of us have. This is especially important for people who are in positions of leadership or people who are stewards for somebody else's life, not just their spiritual life, but their personal life as well. Being open to feedback and being open to asking questions, and not just asking questions for the sake of looking good. Oh, look at me, I'm so humble. I am open to asking and seeking feedback. Not just for the sake of doing that, because that is still prideful. That is still self-aggrandizing, right? But truly being open to asking for feedback and receiving feedback. And when you get the feedback, meditating on it and figuring out if this is constructive and if this will help you, or if this is something that you can KIV or keep in view for now, set aside for now. All right. So taking the time to ask other people for feedback. If you are not used to doing that, ask for the feedback anonymously. All right. But taking the time to ask people for feedback, and then very important, making it clear that you are respecting and welcoming those people's opinions. And that you're not just asking it for the sake of asking it so that you look good. Because everybody knows that there are people like that, even in a workplace, right? Sometimes you have bosses who come to you and say, hey, how do you think that I did on that project? How do you think, everything went? And, how do you think I performed? The way people are, you kind of get it. That sometimes people, when they ask for feedback, actually, what they really want to hear is they really want to hear more praise for themselves. They don't actually want to hear constructive criticism. They don't actually want to hear constructive or receive constructive feedback about how they can actually improve. So just as important as it is to regularly ask for and receive feedback, and it is also important to actually be welcome and to actually be open to their opinions. Especially if you are, like I said, especially if you're a leader or a boss or a director or in a position of stewardship for a community or for somebody else. It's very important that every day you practice seeing yourself, or practice seeing other people as teachers, practice seeing people around you as teachers, or people who have the potential to offer you information, offer you feedback that you can use to improve yourself. So if you make that effort to regularly receive feedback from other people, that is also another way that you can cultivate and you can practice humility in your everyday life. All right. Puna asks, could you people discuss in Buddhist literature? Puna, I'm really sorry. I don't really understand your question. If you could please rephrase that, I will try my best to answer it for you. All right. So, what happens when you're humble? What happens when you regularly receive feedback? What happens when you are open to asking for help? What happens when you, try to cultivate practice mindfulness? What happens when you make the effort to listen to other people? What happens to all of that? Now, I'm going to address the thing that everybody wants to know, which is, yes, there are people who are going to walk over you. That is for sure. Why? Just because you practice humility does not mean that other people are practicing humility as well, right? So the fact is that yes, the reality is that yes, people are going to walk over you. And the thing that you need to remember is that when people walk all over you, that says more about them than it says about you. All right, so first of all, practicing humility does not mean that you stop having the karma to meet such people. You will still have the karma to meet people who will try to walk all over you. You will still have the karma to meet people who will try to take advantage of you. Why? Because that karma was accumulated in previous lives. So you still need to experience or go through the experience of meeting such people. You still need to go through that karma of meeting such people, because it's not purified. The karma is still there. So first of all, you have to recognize that in practicing humility, you will still come across people like that. But what happens when you practice why is it that you actually come across people like that? It's because you created the karma. Why is it that you created the karma? It's because in your previous life, you were someone who took advantage of somebody else. And hence you created the karma to have that same experience yourself in this life, right? So recognizing that you have created such karma by practicing humility in this life, focus on the fact that by practicing humility in this life, you are breaking the cycle, you are breaking that chain, and you are not creating the karma again to meet people who will walk all over you and who will take advantage of you in a future life. All right, so focus on that fact. Now, yes, second of all, recognize that when people do take advantage of you when you're practicing humility, it says more about them than it says about you. It is a reflection more of their spiritual practice than it is of yours. All right, so focus on that as well. And finally, realize that you can't control somebody else's emotions, you can't control somebody else's actions, but you can control your reaction. All right, your reaction is entirely within your control. So again, I go back to the Buddhist parable about the whole world being covered with glass, and whether it's easier to cover the entire world with leather to protect your feet, or to cover the soles of your foot with leather in order to protect yourself from the glass. You can't control the entire world, but what you can do is control yourself and put those leather soles on your feet to protect yourself. Leather, okay, faux leather, if you will, rubber, whatever, to protect the soles of your feet from all that glass. So you can control your reaction, and your reaction to somebody else's arrogance, or to somebody else's exploitation of you, or to somebody else's taking advantage of you, is to deepen your commitment to your practice of humility, so that you don't have that same experience with other people, with other with other people who might take advantage of you in a future lifetime. All right, so here's the thing. It's very difficult for us when we are being taken advantage of right now, of course. When we are experiencing arrogance from other people right now, of course, it's very difficult for us to not react in a manner that escalates the situation. But realize and recognize that counterintuitively, eventually, people will stop bullying you. Like I said, it's counterintuitive, because how is it that somebody else will stop treating me like a doormat eventually if I don't stand up to them, right? So the question that people will ask is, won't people take more advantage of me if I'm being humble? Now, think about it when you've been in a situation where there is conflict between you and someone else, or when you've observed conflict between you and someone else. What happens when you put a humble person next to someone who's very angry, or next to somebody who's very arrogant? Counterintuitively, eventually, the person who's angry or the person who's arrogant will just keep escalating that arrogance, or just keep escalating the anger to the point that it's no longer sustainable for them. So, an example that all of you may be familiar with is Mahatma Gandhi against the British, right? So, if you position the British colonialists as people who were very, very angry, and people who were very arrogant, and who were oppressors of hundreds of millions of people for 200 years, and then you put them next to Mahatma Gandhi, who was extremely humble next to them. He was humble, but he was also extremely self-confident. So that's again another example of how humility can be paired together with self-confidence. It's another example of how humility can be paired together with standing up for something, right? So what happened? The British got so angry to the point that basically, essentially, they were embarrassed and humiliated into acceding to whatever it is that Gandhi was standing up for. So when an angry person is matched with a humble person, that angry and arrogant person is just going to keep escalating the anger until the point it's no longer sustainable for them, and then they're going to have to take their foot off the gas pedal and release the pressure. All right. So eventually, yes, you can win if you are humble, if you're not arrogant, and if you're self-confident. Another example is Mandela. versus apartheid, right? So Mandela's humility against people who were so angry, people who were so discriminatory, against people who were so divisive, his humility in the face of that made them look dumb. It made him look good. They just got more and more and more and more and more angry until they had no choice but to acquiesce to his demands, to his requests. They had no choice but to accede to him. So when you are humble, what actually happens, if you look at Mandela, if you look at Gandhi, when you're humble, what actually happens is you stop giving people power over you. You stop allowing people to control you, and you stop giving your agency of your life over to somebody else. The thing is, practicing humility, it won't happen overnight, in the sense that it won't happen overnight for somebody to stop taking advantage of you. So Puna, I see your messages, I see your questions. I will answer them in a second. All right. So okay, so yes, practicing humility. It doesn't mean that overnight people will stop taking advantage of you, and it doesn't mean that it's going to be easy, and it doesn't mean that it's going to be comfortable, because the truth is, the reality is that it's not nice for people to take advantage of us. It's not nice for us to be used, for us to be exploited, for us to be bullied or taken advantage of. It is not nice. But with time, with effort, with an understanding that we are in that situation as a result of our karma, over time, it does make practicing humility easier. It does make cultivating humility easier. As a result of practicing humility, as a result of cultivating humility, what happens is that you find that more things go right in your life as opposed to when things go wrong. Why? Because when you're arrogant, the general thing is that when you're arrogant, you become overconfident. You don't assess a situation accurately because you think you can handle everything, you think that everything will be okay. And so as a result of misjudging or misassessing a situation, you don't plan for the worst if you're arrogant. So as a result of being humble, you are not overconfident. You are fully aware of a situation and your ability to deal with it, and you are more open to asking for help when you need it. And so you just find that as a result of being humble, more things go right around you, because you have been able to assess a situation for what it really is and to apply or to prepare for it effectively. All right, so when that worst comes, you're better prepared to handle it. And if the worst doesn't come, it just means that you're able to enjoy what it is that you have in front of you. So practicing humility also ends up helping to prevent disappointments in your life. You don't experience emotional volatility. You don't experience having the very, very highs of unfounded hope, because you're so overconfident that everything is going to go well. And you also don't experience, as a result, you don't experience the lows of being disappointed. You don't experience the highs of being super excited, and you don't experience the lows of being super disappointed. And as a result of that, you become more temperate, and you become much more even in your approach to life. So leading on from that, because you're more even and because you're more temperate in your approach to life, what happens is that you actually see a lot more success in your personal and in your personal life, in your work life, in your spiritual life. Why? Because you're prepared for if you're prepared in case things go wrong. Think about it on a personal level. People just generally don't like to deal with another person who's got a lot of emotional upheaval, who have a lot of mood swings, if you want to call it that, who have a lot of ups and downs. People just don't like dealing with that. And if you don't like dealing with someone who has a lot of mood swings and who has a lot of emotional upheaval, so too do people not like dealing with you when you also have your mood swings and when you also have your emotional upheaval. And so when you're humble, and as a result of that you have a more even temperament, you get a lot more positive interactions in your life. In your professional life, you end up becoming somebody that your boss can trust. So I go back to a anecdote from the Buddha's life story about his experience with Devadatta and the swan. Devadatta was, super worked up and super angry, thinking that the swan that he shot down belongs to him. And the Buddha was very humble. He was very cool. He was very calm. He was very collected. So, Devadatta is like, shooting off his mouth in front of the minister, saying, "This swan belongs to me. It is the law of our land that I shot down this swan, and this swan belongs to me." And Buddha, being humble, because he was humble, he was very even. Because he was very even, he had an opportunity to present and state his case very logically and very calmly to the Council of Ministers, who ended up awarding the swan to his care. And so in a professional situation, when you practice a lot of humility and you have the even temperament, what ends up happening over time is that you become somebody that your bosses and your superiors, as well as your colleagues, like dealing with, because they can trust you to act. They can trust you to behave in a very calm and in a very logical manner, in a very realistic manner, somebody who can assess the situation in front of you realistically and to apply a solution to it. All right? And spiritually speaking, when you practice and cultivate humility, what ends up happening is that you end up cutting your attachment to external things that control your happiness. And so as a result of that, when you don't let external things which have no permanent value control your happiness, you put yourself on a path to a more stable existence of happiness. All right? And so, as a result of all of that, very simple, is you stop being so angry. You become less and less angry. You reduce your anger over time. All right? Why? Because it doesn't bother you when people tell you that you're wrong. It doesn't bother you when people tell you that you're not right. When you're humble and you're not arrogant, it doesn't bother you when you are shown or told or proven to be wrong. When you're arrogant and you're proven to be wrong, what is the immediate reaction that you have? Anger, irritation. You then end up showing even more arrogance to try and cover the fact that, or try to distract from the fact that you were proven wrong. And when you're less angry, what that means is then you get more harmony in your life. Very tellingly, I need to point out is that when you have more harmony in your life doesn't mean the absence of conflict. Because remember again that when you are humble, you still have karma. It still doesn't get rid of the karma that you have to have conflict in your life. Again, if I bring up the example of Buddha Shakyamuni was the epitome of humility. There is no better example to embody humility than Buddha Shakyamuni. But just because Buddha was humble does not mean that Buddha didn't have conflict around him, right? Buddha still had people challenging him. Buddha still had people debating with him, arguing with him, trying to disprove him, trying to fight him, trying to bring conflict into him. But the difference between the Buddha and us is that although the Buddha experienced and had conflict around him, the Buddha didn't react to it. The Buddha wasn't affected by it. And so because he wasn't affected by it, you don't see his moods going up and down. You don't see him decide one day, oh, I'm going to be nice to this person one day and I'm not going to be nice to them the next day. You see the Buddha being very even-tempered. Why? Because the Buddha practiced humility in spite of having all of this conflict around him. All right, so conflict will still occur because you do have karma to experience conflict, and you do have karma to run into or to interact with such people. But you get more humility in your life because you no longer react in the same way to that conflict as you once did when you were not making the same amount of effort, applying the same amount of effort of cultivating humility in your life. All right. So being humble means that you are not so rattled by all the things that are happening around you. It means that you have more inner peace for yourself, and it means that you're less tumultuous and less turbulent in your emotions. It means that you engage in less self-blame. Humility doesn't mean blaming yourself for when things go wrong. Okay, so humility doesn't mean blaming yourself for when things go wrong. Humility doesn't mean talking in a very sweet voice, because there are a lot of people who are very soft-spoken, who are still extremely arrogant. Don't you know people in your life, even when they talk in a soft voice, even when they're very, very calm, even when they're very peaceful, something about their entire presentation or their entire being kind of makes your skin crawl. You're like, ugh, or like somehow they manage to say very, very nice things with a smile on their face, but when you walk away, you still feel really bad. You don't feel good around them, right? So humility doesn't mean being soft-spoken. Humility doesn't mean that it doesn't mean being very calm and gentle and all of that. Rinpoche was very effervescent. Rinpoche was very energetic. Rinpoche was very vibrant, but Rinpoche was also extremely humble. humility does not mean that you're soft-spoken, all right? And as a result of, being humble, yes, like I said, I have a tendency to go off topic. Humility means that you do experience more inner peace for yourself. It means that you are less turbulent and less tumultuous in your emotions. It means that you're more steady in your moods. It means that you're more stable in your practice. It means that you're more consistent in your practice, because you know that all the time you continue to have to improve. You continue to have to learn new things. You need to keep reinforcing and improving and increasing your commitment to your practice, to your improving your commitment, increasing your commitment to having better interpersonal relationships around you. All right, so what I'm going to do now is, because we're kind of running out of time, although I have a few more things to cover, but I'm going to actually answer people's questions at the moment. So I'm very sorry if I don't know what's wrong with Facebook, but I'm really sorry if I missed some of your questions. I will go back into the live stream after this and go back through the comments again and answer any questions that I may have missed. Okay, so Kotlian asks, what are some effective Dharma methods that we can use to deal with arrogant people, especially if those people are our bosses and directors? All right. So first of all, I think the first verse that comes to mind from the 8 verses of mind transformation is accepting the defeat and offering the victory to others. Remember why people in positions of power like to show arrogance. Because they feel that in that position, they don't have the capacity, perhaps, to show that they don't know something, or to show that they don't know how to do something, or that their knowledge isn't complete. Maybe they think that if they are exposed to not knowing, and they're exposed to their subordinates, maybe they think that their subordinates will look at them differently, and maybe they think that people will no longer listen to them, and they no longer have control, for lack of a better word, over their team, right? So the verse of the 8 verses of thought transformation that immediately comes to mind is accepting the defeat and offering the victory to others. In this case, offering the victory to our bosses and directors. Now, there's a way of dealing with people who don't want to listen. We can try to bulldoze our way and insist that we are right, and so we can try to meet their arrogance with our arrogance and try to insist that we know what is right. But think about what happens when we do that, and think about whether that's productive and whether that's constructive and whether that's going to help you to accomplish and achieve the result that you want. All right, so you can try to bulldoze your way and see if you're successful, or you can try to accept the defeat and offer the victory to them, and then at a later date, in a more quiet environment, in a more private environment, offer your feedback or offer your thoughts. Help them to think that it's their idea. Maybe it's a project and they think that their way is the only way and they're not open to feedback. Maybe a better way of presenting your ideas is to help them think that it's their idea instead of your idea. So let them look good instead of you taking the credit. That's one dharmic way that we can use to deal with arrogant people, especially if those people are our bosses and directors. If you have an idea, let them think it's their idea. Help them, let them look good. Don't try and take credit for it. What happens over time? Maybe initially, you don't get the credit for it, but over time, you may find that your boss or your directors or your supervisors recognize your value to them. They recognize that without your ideas, without you helping them to look good over and over again to their bosses, you become indispensable to them. So you might have to accept the initial body shots at the beginning of not receiving the credit. You might have to accept the initial body shots of dealing with their arrogance. But over time, most people will come to recognize that when they have subordinates who make them look good and they have subordinates who help them to advance, they tend to find people like that indispensable. So it is very uncomfortable, it is very difficult, to practice humility and to accept the victory, to accept the defeat and offer the victory to our bosses and to our directors. But over time, there are benefits. So I would say that a very effective dharmic method of dealing with such arrogant people is to accept the defeat and offer the victory to them. All right. Bradley asked, are prostrations a wonderful way to develop humility and eliminate the ego? Yes, very effective way. So what Rinpoche actually taught us to do, or what Rinpoche actually taught us to visualize when we're doing prostrations is Nam Guru Be, Nam Budaya, Nam Dhamaya, Nam Sanghaya, right? So as you're going down and as you're doing a full-length prostration, you should go down with the motivation and with the visualization that may I lower and may I humble myself, and may I become a servant for all. May I go down whilst humbling my ego in order to serve and in order to benefit all sentient beings. And then as you're coming back up again, think that as a result of my practice, I arise in order to benefit and in order to serve all sentient beings. So as you're going down, visualize that you're humbling yourself to become a servant, to become someone who's beneficial for all. So yes, prostrations are a very wonderful way to develop humility and to eliminate the ego, because as you're doing that repetitively over and over again, it's planting the seeds of humility. And okay, let me put this in very, very simple layman's terms, right? You're basically drilling yourself into thinking that, right? In the same way that our parents punish us when we're young by writing the same thing over and over again 500 times in a book. I will not be naughty, I will not be naughty, I will not steal the cookie, I will not steal the cookie, I will not fight with my brothers and sisters, you know. And you write that over and over and over again. And to impress on you the importance of that practice, when you do prostrations and you combine the visualization with that physical motion, in a very simple layman's terms, you are doing the exact same thing as writing in that book over and over again. You are impressing upon yourself the importance again and again of being humble to serve everybody else. You are not higher than other people, and you are here to benefit all sentient beings. All right, so yes, prostrations are a very wonderful way of developing humility and eliminating the ego. Puna asked, do you know any good book on previous lives? There are many good books on previous lives. I will list them up for you at the end of the live stream. I'll go back into the comment section and list them for you. Puna asked also, please tell me about Sam Rinpoche. And said that every day he listens to Sam Rinpoche and likes his way of talking. I really love Rinpoche's way of talking as well. What can I tell you about Sam Rinpoche? Rinpoche was extremely kind to a fault. All right. If you want someone who perfectly embodied the Bodhisattva way of life, that was Rinpoche. Rinpoche in his private life and in his personal life and in his public life was exactly the same, extremely consistent. And Rinpoche was complete in his care for people, from an ant all the way up to whales, all the way up to humans and everything. On every level, Rinpoche was perfect and complete in his care and his compassion for people. If you go to Rinpoche's blog, www.samrinpoche.com, you can see a series of stories that have been written by Rinpoche's close students within the 1 minute post section, which talks a lot about these students' experiences with Rinpoche. All right. So I would say if you want to learn more about Sam Rinpoche, you should go and read those stories, those 1 minute posts on samrinpoche.com, as well as read Rinpoche's biography, The Promise. All right, which is also available on the blog. Okay. Hi, Rina. Thank you for joining us today. It's been a while since I've seen you, and I hope that you and Manish are doing okay. Please send my regards to Manish. All right. Okay. If you guys don't have any more questions, I'm going to end it here for today. I've taken on your feedback, Purna. I will try and talk a little slower next week. But I will also ask, please replay the video in case I missed out any points, all right, or in case I spoke too fast on certain points. But I will try and talk slower next week. It's feedback that I get quite often, which is people telling me that I talk too fast. Right, so I will try and apply next week and talk slower. So with that, I will end. On that note, I will end today's topic and ask you guys that for the week ahead, to set a good intention, to try your best to listen to other people, and to try your best to remain mindful and in your interactions with other people. Try your best to listen to them without offering an opinion and without judgment. Just listen to what it is that they have to say, listen to what it is that they have to offer you, and try and set a good intention to be focused on the present, all right? And to try and cultivate humility with every interaction that you have with other people, or even in your quiet moments, when you're just browsing the internet and you're just browsing Facebook, or even when you're commenting on people's Facebooks and you're about to get on your social justice warrior high horse and, start debating with other people. Instead of offering an opinion, try reading instead, or try recognizing where it is that they're coming from, especially with the events that have happened in the last few days. Try to make a greater effort to listen to other people and what they have to say, and be mindful of that in this week. Okay, so try and make that your practice for the week ahead of you, which is to listen to other people, to take into account their feedback and their opinions, and to ask for help when you need it. All right, and also reflect on the past week, the week that has just passed. Who have I shown arrogance to? Who have I shown pride to? Who have I shown vanity to? And if you can identify those people, if you ask yourself those hard questions and you can identify those people, in this coming week, something that you can try to do is try to make those people the object of your practice of humility. Try to do the opposite and behave in the opposite way of how you previously behaved to them, and see if you're able to do that for yourself. Like I said, it's not going to be easy. Like I said, people are still going to try and take advantage of you. And, like I said, you're going to be extremely uncomfortable, all right? Because the fact is that that's just not what we're used to. I have practiced arrogance for the last 33 years of my life. So obviously, developing humility is not going to happen overnight. People who are older have practiced arrogance for 40 years, for 50 years. So obviously, the change isn't going to happen overnight. But if we don't start changing now, and if we don't start going through that discomfort now and making the effort now, then when are we ever going to? If you wait another 10 years, you wait another 5 years, at that point you're going to be 55 and you're going to have to undo 55 years worth of arrogance. So instead of trying to undo 55 years worth of arrogance, why not start now, practice humility now, and work with 50 years instead? It's much easier to undo 50 years than to undo 55 years. All right? It's just pure math, simple math. All right? So thank you guys very much for joining me today. Hi, Jonathan. Hello. So nice to see your comment here. And thank you so much for joining us today. All right, so I'm going to head off for now, just to leave you guys with something else as well. I keep forgetting. See, this is why I have notes, because I keep forgetting stuff, right? We have upcoming programs today. There is, in Chinese, the Dorji Shukden Sadhana on the Chinese Kechara Facebook page at 2 p.m, as well as the live chat with Pastor Albert at 3 p.m. That's in Chinese. All right, and in the week ahead, on Tuesday at 8 p.m, there's Our Rinpoche's Swift Return Puja on the Kechara Facebook fan page, and on Tuesday at 9:30 p.m, there is Easy Dharma for the New Normal, sharing by Pastor Nero or Pastor David. All right, so set your alarms, mark your calendars for those as well. Again, thank you so much for joining me today. Wherever you are, please don't forget to do your dedications, because you have taken the time out 1 hour and 10 minutes today to listen to my ramblings. Okay, so if you have found anything useful, if you have found anything helpful, thank you so much for joining me today. Please don't forget to do your dedications, all right? And I guess that's it from me for now. I will see you guys next week, Sunday, 10 a.m, same time, same place. All right, bye guys.